afternoon.
Morning for me.
He just got a deal.
Just wake up.
Good evening, everyone. Today we're going to talk about mostly fire, a little bit of public safety. We're just doing an overview workshop of what our current structure is from taxation and operating. And so we'll just go through the slide before you. You all have handouts in front of you. I have a few more handouts. Some of you have them. The first slide is going over East Fire. So in Hendry County, we have two MSBUs, one for East Fire and one for West Fire. So the Hendry County Board of County Commissioners has a taxing structure that is consistent, the same from a structural perspective as far as what we tax, but the amount that we tax for East and West Fire respectfully is different. East Fire is a little higher. We did that a few years ago because the fund needed more revenue to sustain the services that were being provided. And so before you will see, for example, that the vacant residential for East Fire MSBU is $30.75. And then you can go down the chart accordingly and see the various different assessments. In addition, as a summary for East Fire MSBU, I've outlined the total amount of budgeted revenue is approximately $614,000. The city of Clewiston, the current budget allocation is $370,000. I'll come back up over with some of the numbers in a minute. We have Montura in East Fire with a budgeted amount of $175,000. We have a forestry fee that we have to pay each year that we split between the two MSBUs, and then we have to pay tax collector and property appraiser commissions by state statute for what they assess and collect, for a total of around $605,000. Now you'll see those two numbers, there's not a whole lot left over there from a reserve and a contingency perspective. So I went on back up to the city of Clewiston, and I did a 5-year average of expenses. And so currently, at the end of every year, there's an audit for the city of LaBelle and the city of Clewiston for their fire and animal control according to our agreements. And then there's a true-up, if you will, and then depending on what that true-up number is, we have to pay or we get refunded back. So the actual versus budget are different. So the 5-year average expense for the city of Clewiston, however, is about $360,000, and the 5-year average for Montura expenses is about $212,000. Next slide is the same thing, but on the west side. So I have before you the assessments for West Fire MSBU. Their vacant residential, for example, is $1,750 and so forth. And their annual revenue is about $584,000. The next slide is the same summary. It's a little different because we have three total stations, 2 unincorporated stations in the West Fire summary. The budgeted revenue on West Fire is about $584,000. City of LaBelle budget's $327,000. However, their 5-year average for actual, because of that true-up we just talked about, is $257,000. Their current rolling average of their county calls of county versus city is 56.4%, according to our agreement. The Felda Fire budget's $105,000. Their average is $96,000. Pioneer's $143,000, and their 5-year average is about $103,000. And then we have the forestry fee that we just spoke about because we split it between the two MSBUs, and then the tax collector and property appraiser.
Jennifer,
Yes, sir.
how come the west and east has two different numbers?
For the assessment,
Single 8775, west is 50.
so it's been about 3 or 4 years ago, the board agreed and adopted an increase in the assessment for East Fire because that fund did not have enough money to sustain the budgets at the time. West Fire was okay at the time, and if you'll look on that slide, the recurring expenses is higher than the revenue, as you can see on the west, but there's also approximately $750,000 worth of reserves on the west side. And if you look at the actual versus the budget, it's more in line of what's actually being spent. Next slide talks about the two municipalities as far as how they handle their funding within their cities. The city of Clewiston is part of the East Fire MSBU, and their percentage that they pay is funded from an ad valorem perspective. Whereas the city of LaBelle, I don't know if they consider it an MSBU, but they have an assessment in the city of LaBelle that mirrors what the county does on the west side. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Next slide, I had Amy come up with the calls of the respected fire districts. And we have West Fire County calls, Felda and Pioneer, and we have 4 years graphed before you. The fire versus the medical calls. So we have first responder calls. These are not EMS calls. These are first responder calls. And so we have them broken down between fire and medical calls for Felda, Pioneer. The next slide is still West.
Felda did a great job at whatever they did. I don't know if it was education or what, but their volume went significantly down both.
And you'll see that with several of the graphs that are coming before you. The next slide is LaBelle. And you'll see the call volume there for city, and the LaBelle isn't broken down between that, it's city and county. So the city calls are the red and the county calls are the orange on this slide. The next slide is fire, and this is on the county side. And this is for Montura, and it's broken down between fire and medical. Following slide is Clewiston, and it is also broken down between the city and the county, like we did LaBelle. One thing to note on this slide is the large increase in 2018, and there's other people in here that can speak to it better than I can, but it's my understanding that this is because of the landing zone issue that we had, which has been resolved. That should not be an issue going forward. So then what we tried to do is, just not for anything, it's just information, come up with average cost per calls. So we did that for Felda, Pioneer, and Montura on the next slide. And, you know, there's so many different variables that play into this, depending on the number of calls and if call volume goes down versus up, and fixed costs versus variable costs. And so there's a lot of reasons why these numbers could be higher or lower. But just for analyzation purposes, we went through this exercise and came up with these costs. We also did the same thing for LaBelle and Fire, LaBelle and Clewiston, I'm sorry. And thing here with LaBelle and Clewiston, and what I want to talk about before we get into the next slide when we start talking about our agreements and updating our agreements, is the LaBelle agreement is more updated than, or the west versus the east. And it is calculated on a 3-year rolling average of county calls versus city calls. And so, for example, LaBelle's percentage is approximately 56% right now, And so the county portion of what we fund for LaBelle, based off their last 3 years, is about $330 a call. And then if you take that and you just do the math to make it 100%, to try to get something that's a little bit more comparable, then it would be $589 a call. And then in Clewiston, we did the same thing at 67%, and we'll talk about those percentages on the next slide. Would be 536, and then at 100, it was 800. And again, it's real important to make note that some of these numbers, I feel like are a little skewed based off of what it normally looks like because of that landing zone issue that we had last
Chair.
year.
Yes, sir.
So Jennifer, if I'm understanding it 100% correctly, what you're saying on the 56%, that's just, you're netting it out with just the county's average. When you add the other, that's when it takes it to the $589 for LaBelle or the $800 for the city of Clewiston.
Yes.
Okay, all right. The 3-year average, you said you put the asterisk in there for the landing zone issue. Okay, all right, I see.
It's just going to skew the numbers, and so I just don't think, it's not fair to make sure that we keep reminding everyone that that number is high. And that's got a lot to do with it. On the next slide, basically today, of course, this is all for your information and for your feedback and any questions that you might have and any comments that different folks might want to make. But the biggest thing that I wanted to walk away from this is to make sure you all understand our current structure, to get a consistency of an agreement of you all to bring back new agreements. And so we've had multiple discussions and meetings with the city of Clewiston, city of LaBelle, just in general, talking about this. And what I would like to see is to have 2 agreements that are fundamentally the same with both cities. And they would both operate off of 3-year rolling averages, the way we have the West agreement now. I'd also like to include some language that has a little bit stronger fiscal policy guidelines, to where that there's a chief at each department. So we're not trying to get into the middle of the chief's roles. We're not trying to do that. But from a fiscal perspective, if there are different decisions that are made and it affects a fiscal policy in a material way, that's something that, needs to be discussed before it's implemented. In addition, we want to establish, I was calling them SOPs, I was corrected, they're SOGs, Standard Operating Guidelines, and come up, we have some really good drafts that everyone has shared, and to come up with something that is consistent throughout all of our departments. And also, comparing and looking at what everybody does stuff a little differently. Of course, we pay per call for volunteers, so all of our departments are volunteer, and we all pay $25 a call. However, City of LaBelle, for example, pays into a retirement, like a municipal retirement deal for their folks, whereas we do not, but we pay taxes because we were approached by IRS and different folks like that, and we have to do that. And then the city of Clewiston, for example, doesn't pay into a retirement fund. So I feel like we need to look at all of that and get all of that standardized, so everyone's being treated the same. And then also, we, the county, have a separate policy, if you will, for in the line of duty, in case of death in the line of duty, for example, that the cities do not. And so, it's been a little while, but there was a request that some of the different departments came forward and wanted to see additional benefits. And so our benefits are not, I don't believe, what they were requesting, but there are some opportunities that we might be able to work together and keep everything. And so working through those agreements, those would be our goals that we would try to accomplish to get everything standardized as much as possible. So our goal is to create a good foundation and consistency for be able to get everyone treated fairly and the same, to be able to have a good foundation to properly evaluate services going forward for our community. And then lastly, I wanted to go over just a little bit EMS. This board has discussed on multiple occasions the possibility of talking about the idea of an MSBU for public safety. So I wanted to share our EMS calls and our volume, and as you can see, this has also gone down greatly over time. And the same analysis for EMS as we did for fire. Total budget for EMS is a little over $3 million. Or if you calculated it for a millage perspective, it would be 1.37 mils based on our taxable value this year. Personnel costs, operating and capital, and our 5-year actual average is $3.20.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
Jennifer, what was the logic on doing a 5-year average on this one and a 3-year on the other?
The 3-year was the statistics on the calls that was given to me, so
Okay.
I had those numbers.
Okay.
And I had a little bit more data for EMS.
Okay.
There wasn't any real reason why, other than that. So the 5-year average cost per call, it's just information. I have no idea how this compares to other counties. We can look at that, though. I think it'd be interesting to look to see what that looks like. But it's good information. It's $554 a call. Some of the overages, just as FYI, is due to so much overtime that we've had. But as of late, we have one open paramedic position. So we're fully staffed for EMTs. Some of those EMTs are getting ready to be credentialed to be paramedics, and so we've taken that into consideration. But with all that said of what we think things are going to, how some of the folks are going to roll into these paramedic positions, we have one open paramedic position, so.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
is the one open position, but you feel you're going to have some people that are rolling into the credentialed spots? Is that because of your in-house training that you guys have been? Good, good.
Technically, we have more EMTs than paramedics, and then they're just going to roll into the open paramedic in the near future, and then that still leaves us with one open that we can't fill internally, I guess.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. And so with that said, for your consideration, if you all want to proceed with going forward with a potential MSBU for public safety, we already have MSBUs for fire. We have east and west. We just went over that. I would recommend that you would consider, for the next step, to consider EMS. And so the way the law requires us to, the processes, we would have to do something before December of this year, but it would be for 2022. Sorry.
Well, what we did in December of this year would still have to go before 2022?
Yes.
Okay.
Tax year 2021.
You'd have to figure
Yes,
out.
fiscal
so-
year 21, 22.
Then you'd have to figure out what you're gonna lower the millage.
Yes.
Can't keep the millage the same and add that on.
No, so for example, on a previous slide, I calculated that it's 1.37 mils at today's value, which will be different then. But that's just to kind of get your mind around what that might look like. But as far as coming up with the assessment, similar to what you're going to hear tonight under a recreation discussion, we would need to hire a consultant to be able to come up with that benefit amount to be legally sufficient.
Is that statutory? Or just highly recommended?
Right, there's not a statutory requirement to hire a consultant, but there is a statutory or a case law requirement that all assessments be proportional to the benefit and provided, and that you're subject to a challenge and losing your challenge if
All
it's
right.
not.
All right, and so therefore the consultant would just help mitigate the fact that, you know, we have credible reasons why we assessed who each proportion.
Right, because as you can
Right.
imagine with residential, commercial, industrial, vacant, you know, there's a lot of variations about how those
Right.
should be looked at.
Sure. I don't think it's any surprise to this board that I'm a huge proponent. I would love to see it go to an MSBU as soon as possible. I think that it's a fair way to tax. I think it's a great way to tax. As the county grows, it allows for growth of the departments as they have to accommodate, you know, the new equipment and the training and the things that they need. So, I'd love to see it happen as soon as possible.
As long as you lower the millage.
Yeah, that's part of the conversation. I think that's what we're all on board for.
Pay one way or the other.
That's right, that's right. I just think the MSBU's a far more, it's fair to all concerned, and it's a great way to tax people when you're looking at something that everyone has an equal opportunity and need to use from time to time.
So if if the home is under 25, they still pay the MSBU's, don't they?
That's right. It's on a per dwelling, nothing to do with your military.
You get the money from the cap, 25,000.
That's correct.
And you're not getting that.
That's,
We're not getting it now. Or on them, not on this.
yeah. Yeah, so what he's saying is a $25,000 exemption. Those, in said residence that's below that, we're getting zero benefit for EMS at all today, or law enforcement. So
But
that's an accurate
But
statement.
I mean, we are 100% certain of that. We know that the Save Our Homes is eliminating X volume of taxpayers.
I think.
Homestead.
That's right.
Exemption is-
Sure.
First 25, the third,
And there,
First and third, 25.
yeah.
and there's
Average
a
home value
large,
in Henry County is 47,000, is that what we?
yeah, there's a large chunk of the county that falls in that category. I would love, and again, I would love to see EMS as well as law enforcement fit into the same discussion.
I'd love to see what those numbers are. I mean, surely that's something that the PA can show us.
Yeah, they'd
Should
have-
be pretty simple to
they'd have to
arrive
go
at that.
back and pull the number under 25 and put them all together.
I'd even go a step further. I'd actually look at the actual tax roll, which is completely within their confines.
But wouldn't they already know that because of what we did before concerning the trailer parks and the?
I guarantee they don't know
No,
that.
not necessarily. I don't
Nobody's
think
looking
so.
at that.
Yeah.
I mean, we could get the number.
Nobody looked at that. I mean, nobody, I remember when I first got elected, we had recreation people that weren't paying in certain
Right.
sections. They'd gone years without paying. I guarantee you this is another
thing.
one that, yeah.
Same thing.
Special districts was irate whenever we requested that, but we requested it and we found out that there were people that weren't paying in.
That's an easy discussion. What else?
So that would be my recommendation for you all, and I know this is just a workshop, so you're not making any decisions, but you would consider, when we bring that back before you, hiring a consultant to establish the proper benefit amount for an EMS, MSBU for the first step, in this public safety MSBU discussion.
Well, we can't do nothing tonight. We can't do nothing. We have to talk about it later. We can't recommend it now.
Put it regular.
Yeah, recommendation. We just can't take action on it.
That completes my presentation. Questions that you might have, if anyone has any questions that they would like.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Yes, sir. So, you arrived at the numbers on the city of Clueston and the city of LaBelle. You touched on very briefly that, I don't know if it's a current agreement or an old agreement. I think all of the agreements are pretty old. I don't think anything's been touched in quite some time.
The Bell agreement is more up-to-date than Clewiston. Clewiston is further out of date.
You alluded to, though, that in the agreement, it's 50/50. In the agreement that's in writing, it's 50/50. So how, just asking for discussion's sakes, how has it been that it's not ever been at 50/50? Is it just because we had the lion's share of the money?
So I can't tell you exactly what year, but we could look it up if we needed to. It's been a long time ago. The agreement is 50/50, and in one of our budget discussions, it was it was decided in a budget discussion, and then the budget was approved, and then it was approved like that going forward, that it would go to 67%. It's many, many, many moons ago. And so that is the way that we've been operating, and we've continued to operate. Now, not for anything, just because I had all these numbers in front of me, I took the last 3 years, based off of the graph that we have here for Lewiston, and I did the math, and it came out to 66%.
Is it 66% of the cost, or is it 66% of the call volume?
The county's call volume.
Is 66% of excuse me, I'm sorry, 66% of the call volume is county
Of the total
of
calls.
the total calls?
And then that's how we establish the share
Okay.
payment of cost.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Did you say LaBelle agreement was up to date
Nope.
with LaBelle and county?
No, she said it's more up to date.
Up to date. So it,
I have the LaBelle one here. It's December of 2006, so it's not real recent.
Holy
but-
mackerel, great day.
But I
Yeah,
think
the
that-
Lewiston one is like late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, wow.
I think.
yeah, yeah.
both of them needs,
So the goal is not for anything. We just need to we just need to get it all brought up to date. They need to be consistent. And I talk about that good foundation. We just need to make sure that we're doing the same thing, throughout the county, to make sure that we're treating everyone the same, and that the volunteers that volunteer their time, some of them work at multiple different departments. So some people work in Montura, and then they may work in Lewiston, or Felda versus, I don't know, but I do believe that's the case. And so we should have some consistency in how we're providing their payment and their benefits.
And, Mr. Chairman, and along those same lines, if you're going to go through that entire exercise, I believe that we also ought to look at the adequacy of how we're funding them. And are we there? I don't know. I've just talked to a few of my friends that are on the departments, and are they getting the training they need? Are they getting the supplies they need? Do they have the tools they need and the equipment they need? Are we okay with where we are with regards to how we're funding them and put them in the business? And if we have to do that, we're asking these men and women to charge into burning homes and auto accidents to risk their lives. I would not ask anyone to do that if they don't have what they need to make that happen and keep themselves safe so they can go home to their families as well. So I would appreciate it if we also somehow engage the right conversation to make sure that that's a part. Because if we're going to do it and we need to adjust the MSBU, let's do it all at one fell swoop so that we can take care of it.
That's part of it's not all of, but it's part of the SOGs. We vet that with all the departments, and during that process, we'll analyze that and look and see where we have shortcomings as far as funding within each one of those departments. And when we bring it back before you, all of that will be taken into consideration.
And just as a follow-up, just on the East Fire, for example, and my fellows in Montura, their 5-year average is 212, and they got budgeted 175. I mean, there's no way. It's a $37,000 delta. Is there? One more. There you go. So truck breaks down, pump goes down, whatever. Are we in a situation where they can communicate that and say, yeah, the pump's down, we need to, but we're out of money and out of funds? We're not going to let them be out there with what they need, right?
Right. So that's why I have budget, and then I have averages, and you'll see them. You'll see, for example, Montura, their budgeted amount was 175, but their average is 212.
Yeah.
So we did go over, because we had to. Now, there were budget adjustments. This is current year budget over on the far right, and then the average is actual. So, those adjustments were made accordingly.
Right. So, but if I'm interpreting that correctly, that's 37,000 less budgeted than what their 5-year average is. Am I looking at that correctly?
Yeah, but it also includes some capital and
Okay.
and things. It's not just personnel and operating.
Okay.
These numbers all include capital, and that
Okay.
you have enough in contingents to cover.
not in East. And so East Fire, and again, going back to the beginning, they are already paying a higher amount per parcel than the West. But in East Fire, there is not any,
Zero.
no. And so, and again, that's that's another reason why we need to get all these agreements up to date and get everything consistent, so we can further look at what's going on in these funds to be able to make good decisions from a funding perspective.
And to further that, what the West Rec was 700,000 or so in contingencies, is that correct?
750.
And is that, what is the plan? Is it
West-
just to have a
West
large?
Fire.
That's correct. West Fire, right? Is that what I said? Is the plan to keep said amount of contingency in case they have to replace a truck or, I mean, that's a significant sum of money.
That money's been building up over time for quite some time. There is a discussion that we've been having as of late with Glades County for another station potentially on the north side of the river.
By the way, you know, it's funded. So the E911 is funded at 1.2, I think. Yeah, in the House. The Senate has a placeholder. They're going into conference. So by this weekend, they should be engaged in that. So we'll know. And that's going to offer us 1 or 2 bays in their facility.
More than one.
Okay.
Because the original plan that Glades had, I forget, it was more than one, I think.
Yeah.
I think they had 2 or.
And then it went to 4
and
or it
then
went to 6 or something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
increased it to be able to have additional
So
capacity.
So then we would have the coverage on the north side of what we were requesting.
So we would need funds to be able to outfit it, equip it, and things like that. And so
Okay.
some of those reserve dollars would go there. But it's important to note on this slide, again, no. Yes, that one. The revenue is 584, and right now our budgeted expenses are 661. We're not spending quite that much, right? And so if and when this occurs with this other station, we really need to look at that and fine tune that. And we would potentially need to consider, not necessarily immediately, but but be looking at it and projecting that assessment potentially might need to go up. The other thing to
What do you mean
remember.
potentially? Why are you saying it so delicately? It's got to go up.
The
How else
thing-
you going to generate money?
The thing to remember for MSBU's is as we have growth, it increases.
Right. That's
Yeah.
right.
And so,
So Portland Bell exploding is going to be very helpful.
That's right.
So-
Organically, the more the money is raised without the burden being distributed.
that's the whole idea of the MSBU. So it's not necessarily a tax increase, it's the volume
That's right.
of rooftops that you have and/or commercial space and/or whatever
But
that
Mr.
helps
Chair,
fund
that,
it.
see, but Jennifer, to this point that you're making, I think that's where your suggestion of creating that separate MSBU, man, that was hurt. That number to where everyone, there is no forgiveness, if you will, there is no exemption. I just think we need to run those numbers sooner than later, because now you get to a point where maybe you can leave the assessment, you know, what would be generated by that millage number. You could leave that alone, leave it flat. And so if it's 1.73, I think is what you put down, right?
7 for EMS.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. So if we looked at that for fire, for example, and it was 0.5, you know, or it's 0.75, and that generates, you know, 585,000. You get the gist of what I'm saying, right? 1 equals 1 million. Let's just say. Well, that's one of those ones, it's a decision that has to be made at that point. But if it's, once again, if it's dispersed amongst the entire population, because the entire population is who's at benefit to receive these services, I don't think this is one of those ones that you should go without paying for services. That's it. Yeah.
They use it more than anybody else.
That's who uses the lion's share of it.
I don't know who uses the lion's share of it. And obviously the lion's share is going down, but, you know, I'm interested to know, like, if you own, we'll use one so we don't make anybody mad. You use Crooked Hook Trailer Park, who's in Palm Beach County, but we're just using that. Do they pay per, or do they pay,
That's Crooked Hook.
facility whole? I think
Yeah.
it's just for one facility, you know what I mean? I think like if you use Tropical Home over Trailer Park, for example, I think that they pay one, MSBU into recreation. But I don't know if it's a per dwelling, but those are all things that, you know, I think as we delve into this, you know what I'm afraid we're gonna find? We're gonna find discrepancies. We're gonna find that this one is paying, you know, River Bend is paying this particular way, but there is no consistency. There's a hodgepodge of different ones that are creating throughout the county, and it's wrong.
Well, we have case study from that, from what happened recently.
Oh my
So,
gosh,
yeah.
yes.
So on east side, a vacant mobile home RV park lot pays $30.75 per site, and
Yeah.
an improved
is 70.
It's 87,
87,
75
yeah.
our side.
Okay, so that right there in itself, I mean, obviously, I don't know if those numbers go back to 1980 or whenever the agreement was, but that's another thing too. I'd love to know. I mean, we know right now that we have call volume that equals X. We know that that averages X dollars per call. How does that all break down? And then I know this much. I feel very confident saying in my tenure as a commissioner, which is 12 years now, I've not looked at these per dwelling or per lot or per whatever square footage numbers. I've not looked at that. This is one of those ones.
I don't think anybody's looked at
Yeah.
it. We look at the total. Anyway, it looks like they'll have to go up, and then you need to build a contingent fund up. None on the east whatsoever.
I think with these agreements that it'll just streamline the process. There could be, depending on that 3-year rolling average, that could change our figures and what our current, because of time's sake, if you want to consider going more towards this MSBU discussion that we've been having for public safety as a whole, that's why I rolled in the EMS discussion with that, to be able to hopefully, go forward with this consultant to come up with this benefit that needs to be established in order to assess it get it all back before the end of the year so we can move forward.
You did figure North LaBelle for EMS with the fire. EMS truck.
Well, that's not figured in these budgets.
I know it,
Right,
but it's figured in the whole scheme, right?
right. I mean, we have to consider that going forward.
It's
and-
considered, it's not figured.
No, it's not figured.
That was
It's
part of the
considered.
conversation with Glades County.
Right, absolutely.
You gotta have that.
But, keep in mind too, as you're sitting here, we're discussing numbers and we're talking about, what is it looking like, what's it gonna take now to be whole. The fact is, if we go to most of these departments, we're gonna find stuff that needs to be gone away, replaced, equipment. There's a lot of stuff, so not only do we need to look at what it's gonna take to make them whole, but what's it gonna take to run that what's it gonna take the operation to run? Like Commissioner Swindle said, safety-wise, what do we don't need to put them in a truck that's not safe. We don't put them in equipment that's not safe. At the end of the day, they could be the ones saving our life on the side of the road. So we need to keep in mind, when we're looking at this MSBU, what's it gonna actually take? It's gonna go up. If this hasn't been done, one of them since the 80s and one since 2006, it's way behind. It's way behind. Again, the voters aren't going to hear that. You're going to raise my assessment. But the key is, we're also going to raise your quality of service. So we got to keep in mind going forward, we're not trying to fix what happened 10 years ago. This is going to start now and go 10 years in the future. We really got to look at this hard. Not just what the cost is today, but what is it going to cost tomorrow to outfit that same truck?
We had a very robust discussion 2-3 years ago, and it was about the wreck, and it was pretty contentious at times. But the one common denominator that most people that spoke about it said, you're talking about law enforcement, you're talking about fire, you're protecting us. We will pay our fair share.
That's right.
But but the wreck was a little more dicey. But no one pushed back about that and suggested that, as a matter of fact. And there's a whole room full of taxpayers. I guarantee every one of them would be in favor of making sure their families are safe.
And another thing that we talked about, if we're gonna do something, we need to do it the right way, not fix up one tire, you need 4 tires. So if we're gonna do it, we need to do it the correct way and not send them out in harm's way, as we spoke of before. So that's one of the things when I got on board, was that we was patching a lot of things up, and we just need to stop patching. If it need to be fixed, we need to find a way to fix it, find the funds to fix it. Harrison have to do it out of sidewalks when we do it, okay?
He's got new ones. He's good for a while.
Does anyone want to speak as we're going forward here? Did you give anyone the chance, opportunity? Now's your chance. Anyone, if you would, come up to the podium.
For the record, Kevin McCarthy, Clewiston firefighter, and on the member of the safety committee for the city of Clewiston. And as Ms. Davis alluded to, it was right about 8 months ago that we approached from the city of Clewiston on the benefits side of where, and it was in relation, it came about because of a bill that passed the state legislature about cancer and the cancers in the fire service. And it kind of geared us into looking at the benefits for volunteer firemen who actually, in my opinion, have a greater risk at that cancer than full-time firemen, and my son's a full-time fireman in Broward County. So the only comment I'd like to make sure is as you hire your consultant, and that can take time, I know how the process works, and she does say by the end of the budget year, but I approached her last year, I missed your MSBU by a week or two, your advertisement, so you didn't leave yourself any wiggle room, you didn't raise the rate even on a basis. So that whole discussion of benefits got pushed for a year. So you're going to come here on your MSBU assessment in May, I think, that you advertise for it, April or May, not September. So I'd really like this not to get pushed. If you want to get, your consultant needs to look at all the benefits at the same time. EMS is pretty much set. It's very straightforward, I think, how they have to look at that. Your fire departments are different, but they all are severely lacking in benefits. And I'm talking about if I get hurt, you have a death and dismemberment benefit. So if I get hurt or I lose an arm, then I'm going to have something covered. But if I'm out of work for 6 months, I have no coverage. I'm out of luck. And we had a firefighter that was out for 2 months after he broke his leg, and he's a private contractor, and he was worker comp exempt, so he was literally just out of luck. And he did it working for Clewiston Fire Department. There's a lot of things that happen. We had 4 or 5 firemen with carbon monoxide poisoning, a couple of EMS firemen. Fortunately, they all got back to work. They were no long-time effects. But that could have easily turned into a long-term disability or a short-term disability of which we have no coverage. And so it's important to not only myself but the other firemen that you look at those benefits and you look at them sooner than later. And so that you can build that into your MSBU rate. You can do that for this coming year, and then you're all on the same page, and you can figure out what your rates need to be, and that consultant will have an easier time if everybody's working on the same page. But I'd hate to see this get pushed because you're hiring a consultant. It doesn't take a consultant. We've provided the county and the city the average costs. It's not a huge number to provide short and long-term disability and some of those benefits. The retirement program that the city of LaBella has, those are not big numbers. And so I think that's something y'all could look at very quickly, very easily, and have in before you started in your next MSBU discussion.
That anytime, as he was stating, what we're talking about is for a new EMS.
Yeah.
That's the only thing the
Will
consultant will
get
be
pushed
looking at.
out
Yeah,
with
I
the
don't want 'em to get-
consultant. I don't think we need a consultant for the fire assessment.
We need to look at that in May, right?
So we could look at that now for this
For May.
next budget cycle, as he was stating.
Then if it's
So
too
you have
much,
the
can
numbers
cut
for
back.
May, because that's when you got to, that's really when you make your decision. That's not when you make your final decision, but if you don't give yourself that option for raising the MSBU to cover those expenses, then you're out of luck.
Oh, yeah.
And we're pushed another year. And again, I provided numbers just for our own benefit on where we're at. I did a comparison of all counties between 50 and 25,000 of what they spend on fire department budgets. We're next to the bottom, and the only one less than us is Bradford County, and they have 27,000 people. So you got a pretty good deal on fire service, whether you realize it or not. And so it goes all the way up to Levy County, which has 40,000 people, and they spend $6.8 million. You spend $2 million. There's a huge difference. You know, City of Avon Park spends 1.5 on their just on their fire department. City of Okeechobee's going through a lot of discussions. If y'all pay any attention to our neighbors, they have a full-time city department. They have a full-time county department, both who reside inside the city limits. It's the last thing I think any of us want to see is us go to be forced into a full-time fire department, but we do need to look at benefits and making sure the firemen are protected and their families are protected, more importantly, for that time. And I want to be sure it doesn't get all meshed in and just get pushed off for another year. So that'll be my only comment. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I didn't come prepared. Good evening, lady and gentlemen. I didn't come prepared to make a presentation, but we have met with Jennifer From an administrative perspective, I concur with her approach and recommendations regarding the item she's shared with you today. She had sent it to us, and we had a meeting last week and reviewed her thoughts on this, and I think we're heading in the right direction. Two things I would point out with regard to personnel, having worked in units that relied on volunteers and saw it evolve in other states to paid. That is somewhere we do not want to go any quicker than we might otherwise have it happen. Our fire chief has done some analysis comparing at least one area in terms of cost, and it's no brainer, obviously, that it's much more expensive. It's arguable whether you get any real huge service enhancement because many of the volunteers are already have the same training. Most actually do. They're just not full-time. So responses and things like that would vary. But I highly encourage us to do whatever we can this year's budget to try to come up with a plan, as Jennifer suggested, that's equitable and treats the districts the same and provides benefits that we can agree on to those fire folks. I know our board looks very favorable on that. We had a work session first week before I was even here on that, and I listened in. And I think we're very fortunate to have the caliber and the numbers of volunteers that are still willing to do it. Second thing I'd point out, when we look at the model going forward for funding, I'm really pleased to hear the discussion. You've got to consider a broader range of criteria, in my opinion, going forward for analyzing how the budgets are developed and who shares what. Call volume is obviously a good indicator. That will vary some, but if you've got multi-year averaging, I think that works. We had that aberration due to that isolated item that we could even pull out and see how the average is without that if somebody wants to compare it. But I would think the data should be available to do that. That has changed. That's not an issue going forward, but I think that's a good approach for at least part of it. But the one thing I see that is missing, and Jennifer gave me some of the history on how the city, at least, and the county have worked together on a major capital purchase a few years ago that contributed, from what I gather, to, I don't want to speak out of turn, correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, to why the East Fund doesn't have a fund balance, if you will. That had to be dealt with. Having recently done this in the community before I came here, one fire truck can bust that $750,000 fund you have there if you're going to pay cash. Obviously, you have options for debt service and things like that, but that's just going to run that cost up. All of you know that. So I think it may be one approach came to me when I was thinking about it since we met last week, is we do a cost allocation basis that takes into consideration capital. I'm not an accountant, but it takes into consideration capital. We're developing an updated 5 to 10-year plan for all of our capital needs. You've got to look a little longer in fire and EMS because of the life expectancy of things like fire trucks. But we could collectively in the county do that, come up with a cost allocation plan that reflects the capital cost, the facilities. You know, they're aging too. And I don't know the history fully of how all of those items have been funded in the past, but going forward, considering, as a couple of you have said, this is going to be a long-term engagement. We need to look at it long-term and look at it as if it were an enterprise fund within the county's budget. And I think the principles are the same. So I offer those comments, be glad to answer any questions. But again, I fully support and will be recommending to our group that we strongly consider adding the benefit package in this year's budget in collaboration with the county in an equitable fashion as has been proposed by your administrative staff. And then looking at how we fund and coming up with a more modern agreement, because anything that's that old, a lot's changed. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer any questions, but I appreciate it. And again, our chief's done some analysis, if you need that later, on comparing the Okeechobee model. Not that we want to emulate that, but just to show you the difference. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars of increase, whereas these benefits, considering those, if it will preserve our volunteerism for a number of years longer, I hope it will. the trend nationally is going in the opposite direction. I think we need to be aware of that. But if we can extend it, every year we extend it, just in Clewiston, we're saving 7 figures. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Davis, you have anything else?
Jennifer,
Board?
didn't you say LaBelle already has benefits? City?
The city of LaBelle and Ron, he could speak about it if you would like, but they contribute into some kind of municipal fund for their volunteer firefighters. I misspoke last. I misspoke last week. I was thinking we paid into FRS when Randy and I were meeting, and we do not. When I went back and looked at that, but we pay FICA taxes that we didn't used to, but now we do with an audit. And so we're all over the place, you know. So for our county departments, we pay taxes. I don't know what the city of LaBelle does from that perspective. I don't believe the city of Lewiston pays into any kind of retirement fund at all. So those are the things that we want to try to seek consistency on for everyone.
Anyone else? Josh? Anybody?
You called him out, he had to come
I
on.
had to call him out, yeah. I seen the look on his face.
Josh Rhymes for the record, LaBelle Fire Department. I agree. I mean, I don't think we need to rush into hiring full-time people anytime soon, but, you know, I guess my question for the board is, what are we going to do for these outlying departments that don't have anybody? You know, we're getting calls daily in Felda and Pioneer where there's no response, and it's having to be covered by either LaBelle or someone else. So that is going to be your first issue when it comes to personnel. That's how are we going to deal with that portion of it. But as far as equipment goes, somebody had asked this question earlier or mentioned about equipment. There is some very, very poor quality equipment that is out there. Just an example, we're doing a Fire One class right now, and one of the county firefighters that came out, as we were checking her gear, the gear was from 1983. You know, that is unacceptable. It has a 10-year lifespan on it. It's supposed to be discarded. And we're giving our volunteers this gear because that's all we have for them. You know, so I think there's a broader picture than just the money right now. I mean, there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed in the fire service throughout the county. You know, and I know a lot of people don't like this word, consolidation of efforts. You know, the SOGs is a good start, but not only that, but our purchasing of equipment. You know, when it comes to foam, I can get foam a whole lot cheaper if I join in with Clewiston and everybody purchases it. So it's just an example. So I think that there's a broad spectrum that needs to really be looked at, and definitely increasing the MSBU for East and West, you know, is going to be a start. But we've got to look at that bottom tier. You know, what do the folks on the ground need to move forward? So,
Mr. Rhymes?
Yes,
just,
sir.
Just as a quick clarification and just to help my own knowledge base.
Okay.
The volunteer firemen for the two departments you mentioned, are they just moved on, aged out, we're not recruiting? Where's the deficiency?
we just don't have, and we have representatives from both of those departments, but Felda, for example, has one person that lives within their district, but they live way off Key-Rye. And so everybody else is either coming from Immokalee, Lehigh, or LaBelle to respond to calls there if they're not working, and everybody has a job. Same thing in Pioneer. There's 3 or 4 folks on their department, and you know, during the day they're working.
They'll do annual like recruiting or how outreach to get folks involved or to get folks interested?
I know they reach out to the communities as well as LaBelle. We reach out to people. We put it on Facebook, and we're looking for people.
Yeah.
So volunteerism across the board, across the country is something that's kind of dying down. So you're gonna see that, you know, especially in our rural communities, when people have to work during the day, there's nobody there. So who's answering that call?
Yeah, good point.
So,
Okay, thank you.
So he's absolutely right from an equipment perspective. Amy is gathering all that information now for all of our county fire departments and analyzing what that looks like and the condition that everything's in, because of updating, so that has been ongoing as part of the discussion. For Felda and Pioneer, it's been some years back. I can't remember if it was a formal agreement or if it was just what we were doing, but LaBelle was over, if you will, that department because we didn't have anybody for a long time. And then there was a period of time where we got some more volunteers and we had a department. And so they kind of were able to back off a little bit. And then he's right, a lot of the folks on those departments are from Lehigh or Immokalee or maybe LaBelle. And so there's not a lot of participation in the Felda area. I think it's similar for Pioneer. Where a lot of people go to work during the day. They live in Pioneer, but they're not there during the day. So maybe they respond at night, but they're not able to respond during the day. And it is a problem. And so LaBelle covers, those calls. And it's an ongoing problem.
Anything else?
Mr. Chair, I'd really like to make sure we're able to get the financial analysis of how many of the homes are not paying, or dwellings, or whatever that may be. And then, there's been 2 or 3 audits that have occurred in my tenure, and we've been blinded, just absolutely appalled and shocked at what we discover. And so I'd love to see how that plays out with regards to, is everybody paying into that fire MSBU? I'm just thinking of 2 or 3 structures right off of the bat that I'd love to see what they've rendered in the last 2 or 3 years. One that really jumps out at me is the old Evercane building. I guess the old Evercane building on Evercane Road, the old sugar warehouse there, I guess it pays $400. Is that what it pays? No, it would pay $877. Is that right? So that facility pays $877. But I'm also interested to know, does the Molasses facility pay $877? And then the one just north of that, where the actual offices were, pay $877? And then what about where H&H Sludge is? Does it pay, it's going to be a $10,000, does it pay $702? And then the house that is there, is it, if I'm understanding this correctly, that home would pay $87.75, and those are I'm dying to see that, because I remember I did a spot check on recreation, and I was like, holy cow, it's batting 500 quick. I know 500 will get you into the Hall of Fame, but in the real world, it'll get you dead broke, and so
All those buildings the same
they're
size?
no, sir. 2 of them are massive,
Bigger.
and I'm a bet. You want to bet again?
Yeah.
I bet you dinner again that they're not paying into that. I'm going to say that there's one of them that's not paying in, just because it's so easy to overlook that, you know what I mean? And nobody really goes back and checks that. And so,
We can check that first.
right? Yeah. But you still owe me dinner for the loss of the Four Corners thing, just in case anybody was wondering. So, yeah.
We'll run that tax roll and look at that and do an audit and special.
So it'll be like really 3 things. It'll be, what would we lose on homestead exemption, or what would we net out in the positive on homestead exemption versus if we went to a flat millage, whatever that would be.
We're talking an assessment. So
Yes.
we identify the number of parcels that are not paying now.
Yes.
And then we haven't identified what the amount is for EMS.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about. But we can identify the number, and then we can back into it later on. when we
Back
get
into
to
that. Then number 2, the actual audit of, are all of our facilities actually being charged, and then how does that correlate back out? Because it's going to make some people mad, but when I look at some of the.
Correct.
Do you remember hearing Mr. Pelletier talk about when he first got elected, how he just found facilities? He found, I don't remember what the number was, but it was
And the radio towers.
I want to say it was 7 figures that he said he found that was added to the tax rolls that it had never been, noted.
Yeah,
And I wonder, has that carried over? And I'm going to say it is. I'm going to say there's some of those stuff that's being missed. So it's always good to look at it. Other people's money. It's a lot easier to spend it when it ain't yours, and when you ain't got to collect it, it's a heck of a lot easier to not worry about it, so.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to be sure and say that I, for one, and I'm sure I can speak for the board, that we greatly appreciate all the hard work, the efforts, the life risking, the long nights, the sleepless nights that all of you men and women put, for the safety of our community. There's no doubt, we definitely don't pay you what you're worth. We just can't afford to. So, but you know that we greatly appreciate what you do, and every day and every evening and every night, and suppers you miss and family time and everything else. So, thank you all very much for that and for being here and engaging. Thank you. That's all.
Yep. We'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.